This is my Suspense in October wrap-up video. Back at the beginning of October, I started what I hope to be an annual reading event, Suspense in October, to celebrate the life and work of Mary Stewart, Queen of Suspense. So, how do I think Suspense in October went? Well, for me, I think it was a wonderful success. I had so much fun reading and rereading some of Mary's books and talking with many of you in the comment sections of the videos, talking about how much you enjoyed her work when you were a teen, rereading her books now, and some of you just discovering Mary Stewart for the very first time. So that was a lot of fun. I also researched Mary Stewart, her life and her writing journey, and learned so much about her. And if possible, I admire and respect her even more now that I've learned so much about her as a person. Hi, I'm Kim, and this is An Oasis of Books. Now, if you haven't happened to see any of my previous Mary Stewart videos, in the first Suspense in October video, I introduced Mary, giving some basic facts about her life. She was born in 1916, died in 2014 at the age of 97. Also, some facts about her writing. She published 24 books in her life, the last at age 81 in 1997. And, well, let's break those books down now. Of those 24, 14 were full-length romantic suspense novels. And then an honorary 15th one is the bind-up, which includes a novella and a short story featuring the same protagonist, written in that same romantic suspense style. Well, the style at the end of her writing, which was softer and gentler. And then she also wrote 5 very famous and much-loved Arthurian historical fantasy books. She wrote 3 children's books and a book of poetry. Now, Mary also wrote many articles and essays and radio plays, but in my videos and for this event, I've just focused on her books. And she wrote these 24 books over the course of 42 years, from 1955 to 1997. In that first video, I discussed some of the features that made Mary Stewart's work just stand out from the crowd, right from the beginning with her debut novel in 1955, Madam, Will You Talk? And if you want to hear more about all those features, you can go back to that first video. I'll link it in the description below. But some of the more prominent, highly praised elements include her lovely lyrical nature descriptions, which really make her settings come alive, and also her intriguing literary references and allusions, and finally, her ability to create and build tension and suspense. Now, Mary's books quickly earned her a popular following as well as critical acclaim and awards. And in the first video, I briefly discussed some of her most popular books. In the second Suspense in October video, I provided a comprehensive listing of all 14 of Mary Stewart's romantic suspense novels, including all the pertinent publication information, the book's setting, its premise, its main character, as well as the overriding tone of each book. In the third video, I answered some very interesting questions about Mary Stewart and her work, often quoting Mary herself, and I read off the first lines from each one of Mary Stewart's romantic suspense novels. Now, I plan to do a video later this month in which I discuss the great challenge it is to go back and read books, or reread them, that were written many, many years ago, especially if those books were favorites of yours when you were a child or a teenager. One of my wonderful fellow booktubers had a problem with one of Mary Stewart's books, well, rather with one of the characters in it, one of the alpha males. The rest of the book she liked. She loved the writing, but she had a real problem with this one character and particularly one incident. And I understand where she's coming from. I have faced this difficulty with others of my favorite authors that I had when I was a child and a young adult. And it is a big issue that we have to face, discuss, and figure out. So in that upcoming video, I'll be featuring several authors and their books, including Mary Stewart's 9 Coaches Waiting. In this video, I'm going to tell you all about the 6 books that I read in October for Suspense in October. And what did I think of Mary Stewart's writing 4 decades later? Did it stand up to the test of time? Because these books, so many of them, were written in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. This was a long time ago in many ways, and not just technology, but in the way our society as a whole views gender roles, gender identities, as well as how we think and speak of people who are unlike us in a variety of ways, whether that be race or class, religion, whatever. So I always reread favorite books from my childhood, my teens, even my 20s with a great deal of trepidation because I so much want to enjoy their stories still, and I so much want to respect the writers still. I'm very happy to say that for me, Mary Stewart has passed this test. I still love her books. I still think she's an incredible writer in this genre. And I know a lot of readers agree with me and really enjoy her writing still today. Still think of her as the original queen of suspense. However, does that make her perfect? No, of course not. Who amongst us is? There are certain things, for instance, that I think Mary would have written differently if she was writing at a later time. But overall, the problems, if you could call them that, with her writing are relatively minor and are based in the era she was writing in. All right, let's get to the fun part. What are the 6 books I read in October, and what did I think of them? Did I find any new favorites amongst them? Well, yes, in fact, I did. First up, I want to talk about 2 books I read by Mary Stewart that were not romantic suspense novels. And I know that's kind of strange because this event is called Suspense in October, but it was all about Mary Stewart, and I wanted to see what were these other books like. Now, I mentioned before, she also wrote some very famous and much loved Arthurian historical fantasies, but I read those back when I was in college, so I know what they're about, and I'm not really a fantasy person, with, a few exceptions here and there, Lord of the Rings. But I'm definitely not an Arthurian fan, and that's just something about me. I know some people are. My best friend in college loved Mary Stewart's Arthur books. At that time, it was a trilogy. Now there are 5 of them. And yeah, those books just weren't for me. But I thought, I do want to take a look at her poetry book and one of her children's books. And so first up, I've got her poetry book, Frost on the Window. Now, for some reason, I thought her poetry would be nature poetry because probably her nature descriptions in all of her books are so amazing. They're just so well done. She was a lover of nature, so much so. She was a gardener. She was really an amateur botanist. And so I just kind of assumed her poetry would be nature poetry, and it's not. So I brought up the historical fantasy books because if you are a fan of Mary Stewart's Arthurian books, I think you would love her poetry. If you are a fan of Greek mythology, I think you would love her poetry. But nature poetry, no, not so much. So obviously well done, but not my cup of tea as far as poetry goes because I really am just a nature poetry person. All right. Moving on, we've got her children's book that I read, and this was A Walk in Wolf Wood. Now, this is aimed at, I would say, lower to middle grade, so maybe 8 to 12-year-olds. But guess what? As an adult, I loved it. It's set in 1342, and it's a historical fantasy. And involves a bit of time travel and a werewolf and castles and some magic. I thought this was great. It was full of suspense, but age appropriate. And I read it in one sitting and I couldn't stop. I couldn't keep myself from turning the pages. And I will definitely be gifting this to my grandchildren. I hesitated because I only have one and he's only 2 months old. But when he's older, and if I have any more, this will definitely be a book that I get for them. So the first book I read was The Ivy Tree. Now this is the 6th book that Mary published in 1961, and it features Mary Gray, a Canadian. Now this book takes place in Northumberland in England in the countryside, and there are forests everywhere and hills and the Roman walls meandering up and down them. It does seem very Gothic, especially with all the stormy weather that's going on here. And the premise twist in this book involves a lot of family secrets and mistaken identity. There is real danger and two men that Mary has to figure out between them which is the good guy and which is the bad guy. Now, if you've read any Mary Stewart or have watched my previous videos, you'll know that insta-love does often feature, not always, but often in her books. Not so in this book, but you have to read it to figure out why. Now, when I started reading this book, I thought, had I read this before? I think maybe I have, but I'm not sure. As I continued reading it, I realized, yes, I did. However, I didn't remember the twists and turns. And every suspenseful book has to have twists and turns. So I did feel compelled to just keep reading to find out what happened and who was the good guy or the bad guy. What were the answers to these family secrets? I really love the ending in this book. And a little epilogue ending that went after that. It was really well done and left me feeling like, hey, I really like this book. It was a bit fast-paced and a little complicated in the middle, but it was well worth the read. And by the end, I just loved it. And is it my favorite that I read in October? Nope, it wasn't, but it was really good. The second book I read for suspense in October was Mary Stewart's debut novel, Madam, Will You Talk? This was published in 1955 to great success, and having reread it, I can tell why. I mean, to be honest, I had forgotten all the details from this book. I remembered the climax, and I remembered my feeling that I took away from it, which was that I loved it and it was so suspenseful. But all the details had gone from my mind. That happens after 4.5 decades. But oh, it was so great to reread it. It had so many wonderful elements in it. It's set in the south of France, and the protagonist is Charity. She's a war widow, and she goes on holiday to this kind of luxury resort with her friend. And as soon as they're there, she meets a 13-year-old boy, David, whom she befriends. And she quickly figures out he is in extreme danger. And she feels obligated to protect him, not just because he's a child, but she's got a connection with him already too. And so she does. She's a very practical, very responsible, very smart and independent young heroine, which was quite different at that time, 1955. Books just weren't doing that. Mary Stewart, she debuted that with her debut novel. The setting in this book, Provence, it's so fabulous and gorgeous. You've got the luxury hotel. You've got all the historical sites and churches and ruins that Charity's visiting, both as a tourist, but also as a way to divert attention from David. Then you've got the building tension and danger. You've got all these suspicious characters. And one of the problems that I found in my rereading of Mary Stewart was in this book, and it hit me when I read the scene. And I didn't like it. And I thought, I wish she hadn't have done that. But then as I kept reading, I realized why she did that. So in the first scene where Charity meets up with one particular suspicious character, he grabs her by the wrists and he calls her a not nice word. We'll say it starts with B. And he says this in an angry tone, a threatening tone. And I didn't like that. I mean, even if he is a bad guy, I just didn't like it. But what comes to be seen very soon is that it was an act. The context of the situation. And if you don't want to be spoiled for one key element of the book, don't listen. Skip ahead about 20, 30 seconds. But the context is that he thought Charity was with the bad guys and that she was involved in kidnapping his son, who was in grave danger now. So he was trying to scare her, even though that's not the kind of person he was at all. So once I realized why Mary wrote the character the way she did, I was okay with it. And that is the only scene like that in the book because the plot progresses and, well, there's not a need for that anymore. One of the things that I really enjoyed about this book that was quite thrilling and it's very memorable, all readers who've read this book know what I'm talking about, it's the car chase scene, the wildly suspenseful, long car chase scene. It's just so well done. I would not think that a car chase scene would be that interesting to read, but Mary Stewart makes it so. And, while it's happening, you're thinking, how can she drive like that so confidently and so fast? You do learn why. But yeah, that is a wonderful part of the book. Now, like many of Mary's books, there is insta-love, as Mary herself experienced in real life in this book. And there's even an insta wedding and an insta little family. And somehow she makes it work. In fact, it works so well that Madam Will You Talk was one of my 2 favorite of the 6 books I read in October from Mary Stewart. So the 5th book I read for Suspense in October was this one, the bind-up of the novella The Wind Off the Small Isles, and its accompanying prequel short story, The Lost One. Now, this novella was originally published in 1968, and that's where the bulk of the story is set. But there is a prologue, and the prologue is set in 1879, and it features a rich young woman on the volcanic island of Lanzarote, and how she falls in love and elopes with a young fisherman. And it's sort of a cliffhanger ending. And then we skip ahead to 1968 to the main story. Now, the way the short story and the novella are connected is because they have the same main character, Perdita. And Perdita is the assistant to a famous author, Cora. And they go on a research vacation to this same volcanic island in the Canary Isles, Lanzarote. There, they happen upon another famous author, a friend of Cora's, and his assistant, who just so happens to be Cora's son. So yeah, a lot of coincidences, but somehow the way Mary does it, you believe it, or at least you're willing to suspend your disbelief and go along with and enjoy this lovely little adventure story set in a beautiful, gorgeous place. And, with a light touch of suspense involved. So Perdita goes on a little snorkeling adventure and ends up in a landslide and trapped in a water cave. And is there insta-love? Well, maybe some insta-love blossoming. You'll have to read it and see, but I really enjoyed it. Now, this novella is actually considered a bridge between Mary's romantic suspense novels and her historical fiction work. And it was out of print for over 4 decades before her niece, Jennifer Ogden, brought it back to all of her appreciative readers. It was reprinted in 2016 as a celebration of what would have been Mary's 100th birthday. Now, as I said, it's set in the Canary Isles, and Mary visited there with her geologist husband, Fred. She liked to visit every single place she wrote about before she started the writing because she was very adamant that she had accuracy in detail and the real authentic feel of a place when she wrote her stories. Speaking of attention to detail, as an aside, but one I found very interesting and amusing, in relation to when Mary sent off her first book, Madam Will You Talk, to her editors, when she received those edits back, her niece, Jennifer Ogden, says, and I will quote, "Mary scribbled out the edits and said, 'My writing is better than your edits. Please don't edit my books if you want to publish them.'" And Mary's former editor, Sue Fletcher, corroborated this story, saying Mary was extremely meticulous with her work, and Sue barely ever found even the smallest typo. And the last book I read for Suspense in October was Mary's last book, Rose Cottage, published in 1997 when Mary was 81 years old. Now, like Mary's other last few books, this one was much softer and gentler in its approach to suspense, but the suspense was there. Mostly, though, it's a nostalgic look at village life in the English countryside after World War II. Our protagonist is Kate, and she's returning to her childhood home in the English countryside to visit her grandmother, who's been having some health issues. She lived with her grandmother and her mother until she was 7, 8 years old, and then her mother sort of abandoned her. Kate doesn't really think of it that way, but it was her experience. Her mother left, and even though she had said she intended to come back, she was actually killed a few years later, so Kate lived with her grandmother the rest of her childhood, in addition to a very mean and strict great aunt who moved in with them a few years later. So this book is cozy. It is, as I said, nostalgic, and it's all about family secrets and a mystery. Kate's grandmother asks her to find some old family heirlooms and documents that she'd hidden away, and Kate discovers they've been stolen. And so with the help of a childhood friend, she tries to figure out where they are, why someone would want to take them, and exactly what are the secrets that she's hearing whispers of, and what do they mean to her. Love is in this book. There is romance, but it's not insta-love because, well, Kate knew this person when she was younger. I found the resolution to the mystery and all the family secrets to be very pleasurable, very satisfying. Now, I did have one issue with something in this book, and it was the term gypsy, and it was used in this book a lot. Because back in the 30s, when Kate was growing up in this village, there was a Romany encampment there. And the people would, stay there for a while, leave, come back the next year. So there was some continuity to it. One caravan even remained in place after the last time the Romany people left the village area. And the children began to use it as sort of a hiding place, as sort of a play fort. And also related to this, Kate's mother, when she left, ran off with one of the Romany people. So the context is there for this topic to be brought up a lot. So you hear the word gypsy over and over. And that term definitely is a slur according to the people it's being used against. Now, the Romany people were treated as scapegoats for many centuries, starting way back maybe in the 16th century. From my research, they were treated horribly. If one or two members of a group do something wrong, the whole group should not be branded, right? But it was very easy to do that with the Romany people because they were nomadic. It was easy to scapegoat them because they were going to be leaving anyway. It was so bad at one point that the Holy Roman Emperor Joseph I in the 18th century made a decree that all male Romany people should be hanged and women and male children should be flogged and banished. Of course, over time, the legal mistreatment of them stopped, but the negative view of the people and that name, which had become such a slur to them, to how they perceived it, hung on for quite a while. In 1971, the Roma people made it official that they wanted to be known as the Roma, or individually Romany. And slowly that has taken hold, but it has taken many decades. It was only really in the 2000s that it started to become the common way to refer to the Romany people. Even the word gyp, a shortened derived word from gypsy, is a negative word referring to thievery. And that's a word still used today, unfortunately. The fact is that in the 1940s, the word gypsy was still commonly used. Romany had not been established as the preferred usage at all yet. However, I think if Mary were alive today, she would probably go in here and change this word because it wouldn't affect the story at all to change the word to Romany throughout. It really wouldn't. And that's, how I have to think of it. She was writing in her time period. Yes, it does still great though. So just so you know, going in. Overall though, this was a wonderful read. Just so cozy, so relaxing. It did have its suspense and you did get to see the mystery solved and there was a happily ever after, but with lots of unexpected happenings. So yes, I really enjoyed it and it's actually my second favorite of the month. And it's my favorite of all Mary's later books, just as Madam Will You Talk is my favorite of her earlier writings. As I mentioned in my third Mary Stewart video, Mary lived the last 12 years of her life with her niece, Jennifer Ogden. And in that video, I shared several things that Jennifer said about her aunt. Something else that Jennifer pointed out was that Rose Cottage was basically her aunt's swan song. Mary Stewart knew this was her last book, and you can feel that when you read it. The tone and the emphasis on family, it really sums up Mary's writing overall very well. In this book, she leaves behind the younger, faster-paced adventures of her earlier years and emphasizes family and home. And as to why there weren't more books after Rose Cottage, Mary was 81 when she finished it. Well, Jennifer, her niece, says this. Mary didn't want to go on like some writers do, with ghostwriters helping and the whole thing not being by her. She was 81, and I think she'd done what she wanted to do and was very happy pottering in her garden and getting on with her life. So for the next 16 years, until she passed on at 97, that's exactly what Mary Stewart did. She enjoyed nature in her garden and many quiet, sweet moments with her loving family. They were happy, cozy years to round out a very wonderful, fulfilling life. And she had the added knowledge that she'd brought so much enjoyment to people all over the world through all the books she'd written through the years. So thank you for sharing the Suspense in October reading event with me to celebrate Mary Stewart. And if you're just now stumbling on this video, please feel welcome to go back and watch the previous videos so that you can learn more about Mary Stewart and her books. Next October, I will be doing the Suspense in October event again with some exciting changes and some additional fun elements. So if you're not yet subscribed, be sure to do so you don't miss when I post more videos about Mary Stewart. And also, so you can be notified as I put out videos about other amazing mystery writers throughout the year, because I do love a good mystery. So until next time, in the spirit of Mary Stewart, I'm wishing you lots of suspenseful, mysterious reading.